The evening sky was painted with shades of orange and purple as James Lee's black limousine pulled up to the entrance of the Regal Hotel in Manhattan. He stepped out slowly, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the pavement. James was a successful Chinese-American businessman who had spent years building his fortune from nothing. Tonight, he had finally arrived at this famous hotel, a place known for its luxury and elegance. James carried with him a worn leather suitcase and a smaller bag that held something very precious. Inside was a jade phoenix necklace, a family treasure that his grandmother had given to his mother many years ago. This necklace was more than just jewelry. It held the memories and secrets of his family's past. James held the bag close to his chest as he walked through the grand entrance. The hotel lobby was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, sparkling like thousands of tiny stars. The marble floors were so polished that James could see his own reflection. Expensive furniture was arranged perfectly around the room. Everything looked perfect, but something felt wrong. James approached the front desk with a smile. He was tired from his long journey and eager to rest in his room. The young woman behind the desk looked up at him with a blank expression. James began to speak in Mandarin. Explaining that he had made a reservation weeks ago, he spoke clearly and politely, expecting the staff to understand or at least try to help him. But the woman just stared at him. Her face showed confusion and then annoyance. She turned to her colleague and whispered something. Both of them looked at James as if he was causing trouble. James tried again, this time speaking more slowly. He pointed to his identification papers and repeated the name of his reservation. Still, no one seemed to understand him. James felt his heart sink. He was a powerful man in the business world, someone who commanded respect wherever he went. But here, in this beautiful hotel, he felt small and invisible. The staff members were not even trying to help him. A tall man in an expensive suit appeared from behind a door. His name tag read, Robert Eaton. Hotel manager. Eaton walked toward James with confident steps. His face was cold and unwelcoming. He looked at James from head to toe, as if judging him. What did you say? Why doesn't anyone here understand me? James said loudly in Mandarin. His voice echoed through the quiet lobby. Several guests who were sitting in the lounge area turned to look at him. Their faces showed curiosity mixed with judgment. Eaton crossed his arms and spoke in a slow, patronizing voice. Sir, if you can't speak English, you should have brought an interpreter. This is the Regal Hotel, not a street market. His tone was harsh and filled with disrespect. James understood enough English to know that he was being insulted. Around them, wealthy guests began to whisper among themselves. A woman in a designer dress leaned toward her friend and said loud enough for others to hear, Maybe he just got off his private jet but still hasn't learned proper manners. Her friend laughed softly. Covering her mouth with her hand, another man in the corner added, All the money in the world can't buy you class. These cruel words cut through James like sharp knives. He stood there in the middle of the grand lobby, surrounded by luxury but feeling colder and more alone than ever before. James tried once more to explain his situation. He spoke in broken English this time, struggling to find the right words. I have reservation, room for today, please check. His voice trembled slightly, showing his frustration and embarrassment. Eaton merely smiled, a cold smile that did not reach his eyes. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't see any reservation under your name. Perhaps you made a mistake. Maybe you should try another hotel. One more suitable for your situation. The insult was clear. Even though Eaton's words were polite on the surface, James felt his face grow hot with anger and shame. He had never been treated this way before. All around him, he could feel the stares of the other guests. Their eyes were filled with mockery and disdain. No one stepped forward to help him. No one seemed to care in that moment. James realized that despite his wealth and success, he was being judged not by his achievements but by his appearance and his language. The discrimination was real and painful. He clutched his bag tighter. Thinking of his grandmother and the jade phoenix necklace inside, he had come here with a purpose, and he would not give up so easily. But as he stood there alone in the crowded lobby, James wondered if anyone in this place would ever understand him or give him the respect he deserved. The grand chandeliers above seemed to shine less brightly now, and the beautiful hotel felt more like a cold, unwelcoming prison. The air in the hotel lobby felt heavy and thick. Like a storm was building inside the elegant walls, James Lee stood frozen in place, his hands gripping the handle of his leather bag so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Around him the whispers grew louder, transforming from quiet murmurs into sharp words that pierced through his dignity. Robert Eaton, the hotel manager, stood a few feet away with his arms crossed over his chest. His tall frame cast a shadow over James, and his cold blue eyes showed no warmth or understanding. Eaton had worked at the Regal Hotel for more than 20 years, building a reputation as a man who maintained the highest standards. But beneath his professional smile and polished manners lived something darker, a deep-seated prejudice that he hid well from most people. Eaton stepped closer to James, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the marble floor with each deliberate step. He leaned down slightly, speaking in a slow and exaggerated tone, as if he were talking to a child who could not understand simple instructions. "Mr. Lee, as I have already explained to you, your room will not be ready until tomorrow. Perhaps you would prefer a hotel more suitable to your circumstances." The words were chosen carefully, but the insult behind them was crystal clear. James felt his face grow hot with anger and embarrassment. He understood enough English to know that Eaton was not simply explaining a problem. He was suggesting that James did not belong in this luxurious place. For the first time in many years, James spoke in English, his voice halting but filled with quiet strength. "I booked a room for today. I am not going anywhere." For just a moment, Eaton's confident smile faltered. His eyes flickered with surprise that this Chinese man could speak English after all. But the manager quickly regained his composure, straightening his tie and lifting his chin higher. "I understand there has been some misunderstanding, Mr. Lee, but as you can see, we cannot simply alter reservations on a whim. This is the Regal Hotel, not a roadside inn." Those final words hung in the air like a slap across James's face. Around them, the wealthy guests who had been watching with mild curiosity now began to openly stare. Some shook their heads in disapproval, though it was unclear whether they disapproved of James or of the manager's treatment of him. A middle-aged woman wearing pearls and an expensive coat whispered to her husband, "I heard these people always cause problems. They come to America but refuse to learn our ways." Her voice was not as quiet as she thought, and several people nearby nodded in agreement. The prejudice in the room was becoming more visible with each passing minute. James looked around the lobby, searching for even one face that showed compassion or understanding. But everywhere he looked, he saw only judgment. The elegant chandelier above seemed to mock him with its brightness. The polished marble reflected his isolated figure. Making him feel even more alone, Eaton turned away from James, signaling to the front desk staff to ignore any further attempts at communication. He walked toward a group of guests who were checking in, greeting them with a warm smile and friendly handshake. The contrast between how he treated them and how he had treated James could not have been more obvious. James stood there, feeling the weight of discrimination pressing down on his shoulders. He thought about his grandmother, Mei Lin, who had faced similar prejudice many decades ago. She had owned land and businesses in this very area, working hard to build a life for her family in America. But powerful men like Eaton's ancestors had taken everything from her through lies and manipulation. His grandmother used to tell him stories when he was a young boy, sitting at her feet in their small apartment in Chinatown. She would describe the beautiful building she once owned, the respect she had earned, and then the devastating loss when it was all stolen away. She would hold the jade phoenix necklace in her wrinkled hands and say, "One day, James, you must go back. You must make them remember us. You must restore our family's honor." Now, standing in this hostile lobby, James understood why his grandmother had made him promise. This was not just about property or money. It was about dignity. It was about being seen as a human being worthy of respect. It was about justice that had been denied for too long. Eaton glanced back at James one more time, his expression showing a mixture of annoyance and something that looked almost like fear. Perhaps the manager sensed that this was not an ordinary guest who would simply leave quietly when told to do so. Perhaps he recognized something in James's determined stance that warned of trouble ahead. The other guests continued to watch the scene unfold like it was entertainment provided for their amusement. Some pulled out their phones, probably to share the gossip with friends. Others simply returned to their conversations, already dismissing James as unimportant. But James refused to move from his spot. He would not let them make him feel ashamed. He would not run away like his grandmother had been forced to do. He stood taller, squared his shoulders, and prepared himself for whatever came next. The jade phoenix necklace in his bag felt heavy with meaning, a reminder of why he had come and what he needed to accomplish. In that moment of silent determination, something shifted in the atmosphere of the grand lobby. The battle lines had been drawn, and James Lee was ready to fight. Not far from where James Lee stood in his moment of defiant determination, another person was watching the entire scene unfold with growing concern. Her name was Tiana Jackson, and she was one of the housekeeping staff at the Regal Hotel. She wore a simple gray uniform with her name badge pinned neatly to her chest, and in her hands she held a broom and dustpan. Tiana had been working at the hotel for almost 2 years now, taking the early morning shift that started at 6 o'clock. She was a quiet woman who kept to herself, never causing trouble or asking for special treatment. Most guests walked past her without even noticing she was there. To them, she was just part of the background, as invisible as the furniture or the paintings on the walls. But Tiana noticed everything. She had learned long ago that being invisible had certain advantages. People said things in front of her that they would never say if they thought she mattered. She heard their complaints, their gossip, their cruel jokes, and their careless comments. She absorbed it all in silence, storing the information away in her mind. Today, as she slowly swept the corner of the grand lobby, Tiana's attention was completely focused on the Chinese businessman and the way Robert Eaton was treating him. She understood every single word that James was saying in Mandarin, and her heart ached with each desperate plea he made. She knew exactly what he was going through because she had experienced similar dismissal and disrespect many times in her own life. Tiana had not always been a hotel maid. Her life had taken her on an unexpected journey that most people would never guess just by looking at her. When she was 12 years old, her mother, Elaine Jackson, had been appointed as a cultural attaché to the American Embassy in Beijing. The family had moved to China for 2 years, and those years had changed Tiana's life forever. At first, young Tiana had been angry and scared about leaving her friends and her school in America. She did not want to go to a country where everything was different, where she did not know the language or understand the customs, but her mother had been wise and patient, encouraging her to embrace the experience rather than resist it. Language is a bridge between people, her mother would say. When you learn to speak someone else's language, you also learn to see the world through their eyes. So Tiana had studied hard. Attending a local school in Beijing and making friends with Chinese children her age, she learned to speak Mandarin fluently, picking up the tones and pronunciation until she sounded almost native. Those 2 years in Beijing had been magical. Tiana fell in love with the culture, the food, the history, and most importantly, the people who welcomed her with kindness. She learned about respect for elders, the importance of family honor, and the value of perseverance. When her family finally returned to America, Tiana felt like she was leaving a second home behind, but life back in the United States had been difficult. Her father had left the family, and her mother struggled to make ends meet on a modest government pension. Tiana had dreams of going to college and becoming a translator, or maybe even a diplomat like her mother, but money was tight. She took the job at the Regal Hotel to help pay bills, planning to save enough to eventually go back to school. Now, as she watched James suffer the same kind of discrimination she knew too well, Tiana felt something stirring inside her chest. It was a mixture of anger, sympathy, and a growing sense that she needed to do something, but fear held her back. Robert Eaton was a powerful man in the hotel, and he did not tolerate staff members who stepped out of line. Tiana had seen what happened to employees who challenged Eaton's authority. There was Maria, the housekeeper from Mexico, who had complained about unfair treatment and was fired within a week. There was Chen, the maintenance worker, who had spoken up about safety violations and found himself suddenly transferred to the night shift with reduced hours. Eaton ruled the hotel staff with an iron fist hidden inside a velvet glove. As Tiana continued to sweep, moving slowly closer to where James stood, her eyes caught sight of something gleaming on the polished marble floor. She stopped and looked down. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw what it was. There, just a few feet away from everyone's notice, lay a beautiful jade necklace shaped like a phoenix. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with delicate feathers carved in perfect detail and the green stone glowing with an inner light. Tiana knew immediately that this necklace belonged to James. It must have fallen from his bag during the confrontation with Eaton. She looked around and realized that no one else had noticed the precious item lying there. Not the wealthy guests absorbed in their own conversations. Not the front desk staff busy with their computers, and certainly not Eaton, who had turned his back on James with deliberate dismissal. Tiana's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She could simply pick up the necklace and quietly return it to James without saying a word. That would be the safe choice, the choice that would not draw attention to herself or risk her job. But another voice inside her head was growing louder, speaking in her mother's words about bridges between people and the courage to do what was right. She thought about the young girl she had been in Beijing, welcomed and treated with kindness by people who could have ignored her or made her feel unwelcome. She thought about all the times she had stayed silent when she witnessed injustice, telling herself it was not her place to get involved. How many times could a person look away before they lost a piece of their own soul? Tiana bent down and picked up the jade phoenix necklace, holding it carefully in her palm. The weight of it felt significant. As if it carried more than just monetary value, it seemed to pulse with history and meaning. She looked across the lobby at James, who was still standing tall, despite the humiliation he had endured, and then she looked at Robert Eaton, whose back was turned in arrogant dismissal. In that moment, Tiana Jackson made a decision that would change everything. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and began walking toward James Lee. Each step felt like crossing an invisible line from which there would be no return. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her feet kept moving forward, carrying her toward a confrontation she had spent her whole life avoiding. Tiana's footsteps seemed impossibly loud to her own ears as she crossed the marble floor, though in reality, her soft-soled work shoes made almost no sound at all. Every eye in the lobby had been focused on James Lee and his confrontation with Robert Eaton, but now, slowly, those eyes began to shift toward the approaching housekeeper. There was something unusual about the way she was walking, something purposeful and determined that did not fit with her normally invisible presence. James noticed her first. His tired eyes lifted from the floor where they had been staring in defeat, and he saw this woman in a gray uniform walking directly toward him with something clutched in her hand. He did not know what to expect. Perhaps she was coming to escort him out of the hotel, or maybe to deliver another message from the cruel manager. Tiana stopped just a few feet in front of James, close enough that she could see the exhaustion and hurt written on his face, close enough that she could feel her own heart hammering against her ribs. She opened her palm slowly, revealing the jade phoenix necklace resting there like a small treasure. The green stone caught the light from the chandelier above and seemed to glow with an ancient wisdom. Then Tiana did something that shocked everyone in the lobby. She opened her mouth and spoke in perfect, fluent Mandarin, her voice clear and respectful, carrying the proper tones that took years to master. "Excuse me, sir. This is your necklace, isn't it? I believe you dropped it." The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if someone had pressed a pause button on the entire scene. The wealthy guests stopped their whispered conversations mid-sentence. The front desk staff froze with their fingers hovering over keyboards. Even Robert Eaton, who had been walking away with confident arrogance, stopped in his tracks and slowly turned around. James's expression transformed in an instant. The defeat and isolation that had clouded his features vanished, replaced by shock, then hope, then overwhelming relief. His eyes filled with tears that he tried to blink away. For several long seconds he could not speak. He simply stared at this unexpected ally who had appeared like an answer to a prayer he had not even known he was making. You speak Chinese," James finally managed to say in Mandarin, his voice trembling with emotion. He reached out and took the necklace from Tiana's palm, his fingers shaking. "I cannot believe it. How is this possible?" Tiana felt the weight of everyone's stares pressing down on her, but she refused to look away from James. She nodded and continued speaking in Mandarin, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "Yes, I lived in Beijing for 2 years when I was younger. I know how difficult it must be to be unable to communicate in a place where no one understands you. May I help you?" The connection between them in that moment was powerful and immediate. It was not just about language. It was about recognition. Understanding and shared experience, James saw in Tiana someone who truly understood what it meant to be on the outside looking in. And Tiana saw in James a man whose dignity had been stripped away unfairly, just as hers had been countless times. But their moment of connection was shattered by heavy footsteps approaching rapidly. Robert Eaton strode toward them with his face flushed red with anger. His carefully maintained professional mask had slipped, revealing the hostility beneath. He stopped directly in front of Tiana, towering over her with deliberate intimidation. "Tiana," Eaton said sharply, his voice low but filled with warning. "I don't recall asking you to meddle in guest affairs. What exactly is your job here? Surely you remember." Tiana felt her stomach twist with fear. She had known this confrontation was coming, but facing Eaton's anger in person was more frightening than she had imagined. Still, she forced herself to bow her head respectfully and answer in English. Her voice quieter now. "I'm sorry, Mr. Eaton, but this guest was in distress and I only wanted to help him understand what was happening." Eaton's eyes narrowed dangerously. He leaned closer, speaking just loud enough for Tiana and James to hear. "Miss Jackson, this hotel has strict standards for guest services. We don't employ housekeeping staff as interpreters. If Mr. Lee truly needs assistance, I will call in a professional, not a cleaning attendant." The contempt in his voice when he said cleaning attendant was unmistakable. James understood enough of the English exchange to catch Eaton's insulting tone. Even though he could not follow every word, the manager's body language and expression made his disdain perfectly clear. Something inside James shifted. He had been willing to accept disrespect toward himself, but watching this brave woman be humiliated for trying to help him sparked a protective anger he had not felt before. He straightened his shoulders and spoke in careful English, each word measured and firm. "This young woman just helped me understand what has been happening here. Mr. Eaton, I trust her more than anyone else in this hotel." The lobby guests who had been watching began to murmur again, but this time the tone was different. Some of them looked uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing that they had witnessed something shameful. A few whispered that the manager had gone too far, while others defended him, saying he was just maintaining proper hotel protocols. Eaton's jaw clenched. He had not expected James to speak English, and he certainly had not expected him to defend a lowly staff member so boldly. The manager's carefully constructed world where he held all the power was beginning to crack. "I'm sorry, Mr. Lee," Eaton said, forcing his voice back to its professional tone, "but I cannot allow a housekeeper to handle matters that require professional expertise. I hope you'll understand." James shook his head slowly, disappointment evident in his expression. He turned away from Eaton and looked at Tiana, switching back to Mandarin so that only she could fully understand. "Please don't leave. I need someone I can trust, someone who sees me as a person rather than a problem." Tiana stood at a crossroads. Behind her was the safe path, the path of obedience and invisibility that had protected her job and kept her out of trouble. Ahead of her was uncertainty, possible unemployment, and Eaton's wrath. But there was also something else ahead, the chance to use her gift for something meaningful, the opportunity to stand up for what was right. She looked into James's eyes and saw not just a wealthy businessman, but a human being who desperately needed an ally. She thought of her mother's words about language being a bridge, and she realized that this was the moment her entire life had been preparing her for. Tiana took a deep breath and made her choice. She nodded to James and replied in Mandarin, "I will help you, Mr. Lee. You can count on me." The tension in the Regal Hotel lobby had reached its breaking point, and Robert Eaton knew he was losing control of the situation. His face remained composed, but inside his mind was racing with calculations and strategies. He could not simply fire Tiana on the spot, not with so many witnesses watching, and especially not when she had the protection of a guest who was clearly wealthier and more influential than he had initially assumed. Eaton forced a tight smile and spoke in a tone that barely concealed his anger. "Very well, Miss Jackson. If Mr. Lee requests your assistance, I suppose we can make a temporary arrangement. However, this is highly irregular, and we will need to discuss this matter further in private." The thread in his words was clear. Even if others in the lobby might have missed it, Tiana understood perfectly. She had just made an enemy of the most powerful man in the hotel, but strangely, she felt lighter than she had in years. For so long she had carried the weight of silence, watching injustice unfold without speaking up. Now that she had finally broken that silence, there was no going back. And she discovered that she did not want to. James placed a gentle hand on Tiana's shoulder, a gesture of gratitude and solidarity. He switched to Mandarin, his voice warm with appreciation. "Thank you for your courage. I know this was not easy for you. Would it be possible for us to speak somewhere more private? There is much I need to tell you." Tiana nodded and led James toward a quiet corner of the hotel where a small tea salon was located. It was a space rarely used during the afternoon hours, decorated with comfortable armchairs and soft lighting that created an atmosphere of calm. As they walked together, Tiana was acutely aware of the stares following them, some curious, some judgmental, some simply confused by this unexpected pairing. Once they were seated in the tea salon with the door closed behind them, James seemed to relax slightly. He set his leather bag carefully on the table between them and looked at Tiana with eyes that held both sadness and determination. "I need to explain why I came to this hotel," he began in Mandarin. "It is not simply because of its reputation or luxury." Tiana listened carefully as James began to unfold a story that stretched back more than 70 years. He spoke of his grandmother, Mei Lin, a remarkable woman who had arrived in America in the 1940s with nothing but determination and dreams. Mei Lin had worked tirelessly, saving every penny, learning English in the evenings, and slowly building a business empire in Manhattan. "My grandmother was brilliant," James said, his voice filled with pride. "She started with a small laundry service, but within 10 years she owned several buildings in this area, including the land where this hotel now stands. She was respected in the community, known for her fairness and her generosity." Tiana found herself drawn into the story, imagining this strong Chinese woman carving out a life in a country that was not always welcoming to immigrants. "What happened to her?" she asked softly. James's expression darkened. "In the early 1950s, there was a group of businessmen who wanted her properties. They were powerful men with connections to politicians and banks. They saw an immigrant woman as an easy target." He paused, struggling with the painful memories that had been passed down through his family. They used legal tricks, forged documents, and intimidation. Within a year, they had taken everything from her. "And one of those men," Tiana said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn, "was related to Robert Eaton." James nodded. George Eaton was his grandfather, the same man who smiled to my grandmother's face while plotting to destroy her behind her back. My grandmother died bitter and broken, but she made my mother promise that one day our family would return and reclaim what was stolen before she died. She gave my mother this. He carefully removed the jade phoenix necklace from his bag and held it up to the light. The necklace was even more beautiful up close. The craftsmanship was exceptional, with tiny details carved into the jade that must have taken months to complete. But more than its beauty, the necklace radiated history and meaning. It was a symbol of everything Mei Lin had lost and everything her family had fought to preserve. "The phoenix represents rebirth," James explained. "My grandmother believed that our family's honor would one day be reborn, that justice would eventually be served. She told my mother that this necklace was the key, though for years we did not understand what she meant." Tiana leaned forward, fascinated. "And now you understand," James smiled for the first time since entering the hotel. "Yes, before my mother died last year, she finally told me the full story. My grandmother had a secret room built in her building, a hidden chamber where she kept copies of all her business documents, proof of ownership, records of transactions, everything. She had it designed so that only this necklace could unlock it." "And you think that room still exists?" Tiana said, excitement rising in her chest. "Here in this hotel?" "I don't think it exists," James replied. "I know it does. I have studied the original architectural plans. My grandmother was clever. She built the room in a way that looked like it was just part of the building's structure. The people who stole her property never knew it was there. And when they eventually sold the land and someone built this hotel, the secret room was simply incorporated into the new construction." Tiana sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what James was telling her. This was not just about one man seeking justice for his family. This was about uncovering a decades-old conspiracy, about revealing truths that powerful people had worked hard to keep buried. "Why are you telling me all of this?" she asked. "We only just met. How do you know you can trust me?" James looked at her with an intensity that made her understand how he had become so successful in business. "Because you spoke up when no one else would. Because you risked your livelihood to help a stranger. Because when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it means to be invisible, to be dismissed, To be judged by the color of your skin or the language you speak. He paused, then added more softly, My grandmother would have liked you. Tiana felt tears prick at her eyes. In her entire 2 years working at the hotel, no one had truly seen her not like this. What do you need me to do? She asked. Help me find that room, James said simply. With your knowledge of the hotel's layout and your ability to move through the building without attracting attention, and with my understanding of where the room should be located, I believe we can find it. And when we do, we will have the evidence we need to expose what the Eaton family did and reclaim my grandmother's legacy. Tiana knew that agreeing to help James would put her in even greater danger. Eaton was already angry with her, and if he discovered what they were planning, he would do everything in his power to stop them. But she also knew that this was her chance to be part of something larger than herself, to use her unique skills and position for a purpose that mattered. She extended her hand across the table. I'm with you, Mr. Lee. Let's find your grandmother's room and bring the truth to light. James shook her hand firmly. And in that moment, an unlikely alliance was forged between a Chinese-American billionaire and a black hotel maid. Two people from completely different worlds united by a shared commitment to justice. The evening descended upon the Regal Hotel like a heavy curtain, bringing with it shadows that seemed to hide more than just the fading daylight. James and Tiana remained in the quiet tea salon, spreading out papers and old photographs that James had brought with him. The documents were yellowed with age, some so fragile that they threatened to crumble at the slightest touch. But each one held a piece of the puzzle they needed to solve. James pulled out a faded architectural blueprint and carefully unfolded it on the table. His fingers traced along the lines and measurements with practiced precision. This is the original design of my grandmother's building, he explained in Mandarin. She hired a Chinese architect who understood her need for privacy and security. See here. He pointed to a section of the blueprint that showed an unusual configuration of walls. Tiana leaned closer, studying the intricate drawings. Even though she had no formal training in architecture, she could see that something about this particular area was different from the rest of the structure. There appeared to be a small space that did not quite match up with the rooms around it, as if it existed in a pocket of its own. This is where the Phoenix wing should be, James said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. My grandmother called it that because the Phoenix was her symbol of hope. The room was designed to be accessed through a hidden entrance, and only this necklace serves as the key. He held up the jade Phoenix, and in the dim light of the tea salon, it seemed to glow with purpose. Tiana tried to orient herself mentally within the hotel's layout. She had cleaned nearly every floor and corridor over the past 2 years, memorizing the building's geography without even realizing it. If this blueprint is accurate, she said slowly, then the Phoenix wing would be located somewhere near the west side of the 3rd floor. There's a section there that I always thought was strange. James's eyes lit up with excitement. Strange how... Well, Tiana continued, thinking carefully. There's a long hallway that seems longer on the outside than it feels when you walk through it. And there's decorative molding on one wall that doesn't match the rest of the hotel's design. It's older, more ornate, like it came from a different era. She paused, realization dawning on her face. I think that molding might have been part of your grandmother's original building. James stood up abruptly, barely able to contain his eagerness. We need to go there now, tonight. Before Eaton realizes what we're looking for. Tiana hesitated. Glancing toward the door, the hotel is still full of guests and staff. If we're caught wandering around that area, especially together, it will raise suspicions. Eaton probably already has people watching us. She was right. And James knew it. He forced himself to sit back down and think strategically. Then we need to wait until later, when most people are asleep. Can you move through the hotel at night without being noticed? Tiana nodded. The night shift staff knows me. I can say I'm doing a special cleaning assignment. But you'll need to be more careful. A guest wandering the halls at midnight will definitely attract attention. They spent the next hour developing a plan. James would leave the tea salon first, returning to the room that Eaton had finally grudgingly assigned to him on the 2nd floor. Tiana would finish her regular shift, then change into her work uniform and gather cleaning supplies that would serve as her cover story. They would meet at the west stairwell at exactly 11:30 that night. As Tiana prepared to leave, James reached out and gently touched her arm. I know I keep saying this, but thank you. You're risking so much to help me. If this becomes too dangerous, you can back out. I would understand, Tiana smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her usually cautious face. Mr. Lee, for 2 years I've been invisible in this hotel, walking past injustice and staying silent because I was afraid. But my mother didn't raise me to be a coward. She raised me to build bridges between people and to stand up for what's right. I'm not backing out. Meanwhile, in his private office on the 4th floor, Robert Eaton was far from idle. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, staring at the security monitors that showed various angles of the hotel. His jaw was clenched tight with frustration, and his fingers drummed an agitated rhythm on the desk surface. Eaton had built his career on maintaining absolute control. He controlled the staff, the operations, the reputation, everything. But now a Chinese billionaire and a housekeeping maid were threatening to unravel everything. He could feel it in his bones, some instinct honed over decades of protecting his family's interests. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he kept for special situations. Situations that required discretion and results. "I need information on James Lee," he said when someone answered. "Everything. His business dealings, his family background, his reasons for being in New York, and I need it by tomorrow morning." Eaton hung up and made another call, this one to the head of hotel security. "I want surveillance increased on room 247 and on the employee Tiana Jackson. I want to know everywhere they go, everyone they talk to, every move they make." "Understood." After ending the call, Eaton stood and walked to his office window, which overlooked a portion of the hotel's west wing. His mind raced with dark possibilities. He thought about his grandfather, George, who had told him stories when he was a boy. Stories about building the family fortune. Though those stories had always been vague about certain details, for the first time in his life, Eaton wondered if there were truths about his family's history that he had never wanted to examine too closely. Had his grandfather really been the shrewd businessman Eaton had always admired, or had there been something darker in how the family wealth was accumulated? The question made him uncomfortable, so he pushed it away and focused instead on protecting what was his. Back in her small apartment in Harlem, Tiana sat on her bed and told her mother everything that had happened that day. Elaine Jackson listened with a mixture of concern and pride. When Tiana finished, her mother took both of her hands. "Baby, you know this could cost you your job, maybe more," Elaine said gently. "This Eaton man sounds dangerous when he feels threatened." "I know, Mama," Tiana replied. "But you always taught me that silence in the face of injustice makes you part of the injustice." "I have to do this." Elaine pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "Then you do it carefully, you do it smart. And you remember that you're not alone. Your ancestors survived worse than this, and their strength lives in you." As the clock ticked toward 11:30, both James and Tiana prepared for what lay ahead. Neither of them could have known that their search for the Phoenix Wing would uncover far more than just old documents. They were about to open a door that had been sealed for 70 years, and behind that door waited secrets that would shake the foundations of the Regal Hotel and everyone connected to it. The jade phoenix necklace sat on James's bedside table, waiting to fulfill the purpose for which it had been created so many decades ago. In the darkness of the hotel, the truth was stirring, ready to emerge from the shadows where it had hidden for far too long. The hotel hallways were eerily quiet at 11:30 at night, with only the soft hum of the ventilation system breaking the silence. Tiana pushed her cleaning cart slowly down the west corridor of the 3rd floor, her heart beating so loudly she was certain someone would hear it. Every shadow seemed threatening. Every distant sound made her jump. But she forced herself to maintain the appearance of a worker simply doing her late-night duties. James appeared from the stairwell exactly on time. Dressed in dark clothing that helped him blend into the shadows, he moved quietly for a man of his size. Years of business negotiations having taught him the value of discretion. When he spotted Tiana, relief washed over his face, and he quickly joined her by the cleaning cart. "Did anyone see you?" Tiana whispered in Mandarin. Her eyes scanning the empty hallway nervously, James shook his head. The night desk clerk was busy with a phone call. "I slipped past without any trouble." "Now show me this wall you mentioned." Tiana led him further down the corridor to a section that looked unremarkable at first glance. The wallpaper here was a deep burgundy color with gold accents. An ornate wooden molding ran along the edges. To most people, it would appear as just another decorative element of the hotel's elegant design. But Tiana had noticed something others had missed. "Look at this carving," she said, running her fingers along a section of the molding. "It's different from the rest of the hotel. See these symbols? They're not just decorative patterns." James leaned closer, pulling a small flashlight from his pocket to illuminate the carved wood. His breath caught when he recognized the delicate image hidden within the elaborate design. There, barely visible among the swirling patterns, was a tiny phoenix with its wings spread. The craftsmanship was so subtle that unless you knew what to look for, you would never notice it. "My grandmother's signature mark," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She put this symbol on everything she built. This is it, Tiana. This is the entrance to the phoenix wing." With trembling hands, James removed the jade necklace from his pocket. The stone seemed to pulse with an inner light in the darkness of the hallway. He pressed it gently against the carved phoenix on the molding, and for a moment, nothing happened. Tiana held her breath, fear and hope warring in her chest. Then they heard it, a soft click, like an ancient lock finally releasing after decades of waiting. A section of the wall, about 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide, shifted slightly inward, revealing that it was not a solid wall at all, but a cleverly disguised door. The movement was so smooth and silent that it was clear the mechanism had been built by a master craftsman. James pushed the door open slowly, and stale air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of old paper and time itself. Tiana grabbed a flashlight from her cleaning cart, and together they stepped through the hidden entrance into a space that had been sealed since the 1950s. The Phoenix wing was smaller than Tiana had imagined, perhaps 15 feet by 20 feet, but it was perfectly preserved. The walls were covered in silk wallpaper that had faded but still showed traces of beautiful hand-painted birds and flowers. Wooden filing cabinets lined one wall, and an elegant desk sat in the center of the room, its surface covered with a thin layer of dust. "It's like stepping back in time," Tiana breathed. Her voice barely above a whisper, James moved to the desk with reverent steps, his eyes scanning the room that his grandmother had created as a sanctuary for her most important possessions. He opened the top drawer of the desk and found it filled with leather-bound ledgers, each one meticulously labeled with dates and business names. But it was the large envelope in the bottom drawer that made James's hands shake. The envelope was sealed with red wax that bore the impression of a phoenix, and across the front in elegant handwriting were the words, "To my descendants, the truth they tried to bury." Tiana stood beside James as he carefully broke the seal and removed the contents. Inside were dozens of documents, land deeds with Mei Lin's name clearly written, business contracts, bank statements, and most damning of all, a handwritten confession letter from George Eaton himself. James read the letter aloud, translating from English to Mandarin so that both he and Tiana could fully understand its contents. "To Mrs. Mei Lin, I, George Eaton, hereby confess all the sins and wrongdoings I have committed against you and your family. Through deceit, forgery, and coercion, I unlawfully seized your properties. I exploited your position as an immigrant woman, knowing that you had limited legal recourse. I bribed officials, falsified documents, and threatened witnesses." The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing every illegal action George Eaton had taken to steal Mei Lin's empire. At the end, he had written, "I know this confession cannot undo the harm I have caused. I write it not out of goodness, but out of fear for my own soul. I hope that someday, somehow, this letter will help your family reclaim what I stole, though I am too much a coward to make it right while I still live." Tiana felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to the confession. The injustice of what had been done to Mei Lin was overwhelming, but so was the triumph of this moment. The truth had survived, hidden but waiting. Patient as the jade phoenix itself, James carefully gathered all the documents, his face set with determination. "This is everything we need," he said. "This proves that my grandmother was the rightful owner, that the Eaton family built their fortune on theft and lies. With this evidence, we can file lawsuits, demand investigations, expose the corruption that has been buried for 70 years. But even as hope filled the room, danger was approaching. Neither James nor Tiana heard the soft footsteps in the hallway outside. They did not see the shadow that fell across the hidden doorway. Robert Eaton stood there, his face pale with shock and rage. Having followed them through the hotel's security system, he had watched them disappear into a wall he never knew could open. And now he stared at the secret room that threatened to destroy everything his family had built. "So," Eaton said, his voice cold as winter ice, "you found my grandfather's shame. Did you really think I would let you walk out of here with those documents? Did you think I would let you destroy my family's legacy?" James and Tiana spun around. Startled by the voice, they saw Eaton standing in the doorway, and behind him were 2 large security guards, blocking any escape. The manager's face was twisted with desperation and fury, the mask of civility completely stripped away. "This is over, Mr. Lee," Eaton continued. stepping into the Phoenix wing. "Those documents are going to disappear. Just like you and your helpful little maid are going to disappear. This hotel has many places where people can vanish." Tiana felt ice run through her veins. But beside her, James stood tall, clutching the documents to his chest. "You can't hide the truth forever, Eaton," he said firmly. "Too many people already know we're here. If anything happens to us, questions will be asked." Eaton smiled. But there was no warmth in it, only cold calculation. "Who would miss a hotel maid? And as for you, Mr. Lee, tragic accidents happen all the time in New York City." The tension in the Phoenix wing was suffocating, like the air itself had turned solid. Robert Eaton stood blocking the doorway with his security guards, confident that he had cornered his enemies and could finally eliminate the threat they posed to his family's legacy. But what Eaton did not know was that James Lee had not survived decades in the cutthroat world of international business by being unprepared. James reached slowly into his jacket pocket, and Eaton's guards tensed, ready to tackle him if he pulled out a weapon. But instead of a gun, James withdrew a small phone. "Before you do anything you'll regret," James said calmly in English. "You should know that I've been recording everything on a live stream. Every word you just said about making us disappear has been transmitted to my lawyer, to the media, and to several civil rights organizations." Eaton's face went from pale to ashen. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. Tiana, finding courage in James's calm demeanor, pulled out her own phone. "And I sent photos of all these documents to my mother 30 minutes ago, along with instructions to contact the police if she doesn't hear from me within the hour. Your grandfather's confession is already beyond your reach."
"Mr. Eaton," the manager's composure cracked completely.
He lunged forward, trying to grab the documents from James's hands. But one of the security guards, a young man named Marcus, suddenly stepped between them. "Mr. Eaton, I can't be part of this," Marcus said firmly. "I signed up to protect people, not to help you commit crimes." The other guard, an older man who had worked for Eaton for years, looked conflicted, but after a moment's hesitation, he also stepped back. "He's right, Mr. Eaton. This has gone too far." Eaton stood alone now, his empire crumbling around him, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "Everything I have, everything my family built, it all came from these properties. If the truth comes out, we'll lose it all." James looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Your grandfather understood what he had done was wrong. That's why he wrote that confession. He knew that stolen wealth could never bring true peace. My grandmother lost everything, but she never lost her dignity or her integrity. Can you say the same?" Before Eaton could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder as they approached the hotel. Tiana's mother had indeed contacted the police when she received the documents, and she had also called Amanda Chun from the Chinatown Historical Society and Sarah Winters, the journalist. Within minutes, the quiet hotel corridor was filled with police officers, news reporters, and witnesses. Detective Maria Rodriguez took charge of the scene, securing the Phoenix wing and carefully collecting all the evidence. She looked at the confession letter with amazement. "In 20 years on the force, I've never seen anything like this," she said. "A 70-year-old mystery solved in a secret room. This is going to be the case of my career." Sarah Winters was already filming everything with her camera crew, documenting the hidden room, interviewing James and Tiana, and capturing Eaton's face as he realized his world was ending. "This is Sarah Winters reporting live from the Regal Hotel," she said into the camera, "where tonight, a stunning discovery has revealed decades of fraud, discrimination, and cover-ups at one of Manhattan's most prestigious establishments. By morning, the story had exploded across every news outlet in the country. The headlines screamed about justice finally served, about an immigrant woman's stolen legacy, about a brave maid who risked everything to help a stranger. Social media platforms were flooded with messages of support for James and Tiana, and calls for accountability echoed from every corner. The hotel's board of directors held an emergency meeting and unanimously voted to remove Robert Eaton from his position. They also announced that they would work with James Lee to make full restitution for the properties stolen from Mei Lin, including transferring ownership of the hotel itself to James's family foundation. 3 months later, James stood in the same lobby where he had been humiliated and dismissed. But everything was different now. The Regal Hotel had been renamed the Mei Lin Heritage Hotel, with a beautiful statue of his grandmother in the main entrance. The statue showed her holding a jade phoenix, symbolizing the rebirth of justice and truth. Tiana stood beside James at the dedication ceremony, no longer wearing a maid's uniform but dressed in an elegant suit. James had offered her a position as the hotel's director of cultural affairs, with a salary that allowed her to finally pursue her dreams of education and helping other immigrants navigate language barriers. "My grandmother would have loved this moment," James said softly to Tiana, speaking in Mandarin as they often did, not because of the wealth or the recognition, but because truth finally won over deception. Tiana smiled, thinking of her own mother standing proudly in the audience. "Our mothers both taught us that courage means standing up even when you're afraid. I'm grateful that we both learned that lesson." In the audience, Elaine Jackson wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her daughter being honored for her bravery. Amanda Chun and Sarah Winters sat nearby, already working on a book about the case that would expose similar instances of discrimination and theft against immigrant communities. Even Marcus and the other security guard who had refused to follow Eaton's orders were recognized for their integrity. They received commendations from the police department and job offers from multiple hotels that valued employees with moral courage. As for Robert Eaton, he faced multiple criminal charges, including conspiracy, attempted assault, and obstruction of justice. His family's empire had indeed crumbled, but not because of exposure. It crumbled because it had been built on a foundation of lies, and such foundations can never stand forever. The ceremony concluded with James and Tiana unveiling a new scholarship program in Mei Lin's name. Designed to help immigrant students learn English and pursue higher education, "My grandmother believed that language was power," James said in his speech, "and that education was the key to dignity and opportunity. This scholarship will honor her memory by helping others build bridges between cultures." Just as Tiana did for me, as the crowd applauded and cameras flashed, Tiana looked up at the statue of Mei Lin holding the jade phoenix. She thought about how one small act of courage, speaking up when it would have been safer to stay silent, had changed so many lives. The phoenix had indeed risen from the ashes, carrying with it a message that truth and justice, no matter how long buried, will always find a way to emerge into the light. The hotel that had once been a place of discrimination and hidden shame had been transformed into a beacon of hope and reconciliation, and at its heart stood two unlikely heroes: a Chinese-American billionaire and a black maid who spoke fluent Mandarin, proving that courage knows no boundaries of wealth, race, or status.